Hello, my name is Brad Glover. I am a librarian at the Ruby System Library in Pagosa Springs. Welcome to April. Today we're going to be doing a DIY using a used book, and we're going to turn it into a keepsake box, or it can also be used as a safe to hide on your bookshelf, and it can be used to keep heirlooms in, coins, whatever you want, whatever fits inside this keepsake box we're going to make. These look really cool and are made from actual books. Sometimes you'll see these keepsake boxes sold commercially, but they're not real books. Um, these we're going to make out of a real book, and it's just a really cool thing to add to your bookshelf. And it's a convenient way to add small heirlooms into. But before we begin, I want to back up a couple months and briefly mention a craft we did back in the fall. Give me just a second while I pull this up. So you should be able to see an image of this orange thing was when we made book pumpkins. We took a book, we removed its binding, and so all that was left was the spine on the left. And then we used an X-Acto knife or other razor blade, and we carved out that half circular shape of a pumpkin. And when we unfolded it, it was a three-dimensional round all the way around object that we could then paint, and it looked like a pumpkin. So this was basically sculpting the book into the shape we wanted. That's a little bit different than what we're going to do today, where we're going to preserve the binding of the book. We're going to preserve the book cover, and the pages are mostly going to be intact, except we're going to remove the center of the book so that essentially we have a hollowed out book. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to briefly mention it. This is a time-consuming activity. It takes more than just a few minutes to do. So you want to definitely pace yourself and do it at a speed you're comfortable with. To that end, slower is always better because we will be using sharp razor blades. I recommend having an X-Acto knife, and because it's always good to have a sharp X-Acto knife, I recommend buying a new blade or just getting a new one altogether. Don't ever use a rusty or old X-Acto knife or any kind of razor blade. They need to be sharp for a reason, but you need to be really careful with them. So this activity probably isn't appropriate for younger kids. I also recommend having a box cutter. Again, your box cutter should have a sharp, trying to angle it so you can see it, should have a really sharp blade. Again, don't use a box cutter that has an old rusty blade or an old dull blade that's not very sharp. So safety first, please be mindful of the sharpness of those objects. You can easily cut yourself. The other thing you'll need is a used book. This is a book that you will intend to not destroy, but you have to cut up a book. So definitely pick one that you feel comfortable doing so. I like to find one that's got an attractive binding or book cover or spine. If you come to the library, in between the two sets of entrance doors, we have some books that you're welcome just to take. They're free. We don't want them back. You're welcome to take one of those books for any of our book crafts. We also have used books that if you really wanted to, you could buy one of our used books and use it for a craft. But most of us have some books laying around that they can be repurposed. For this craft, you'll also need a ruler and a good pencil. And if you have a binder clip, or if you don't have binder clips, you can use a clothespin. That usually works too. Even a rubber band might work for what we're going to do with this in a little bit. So I'll set those aside for now. You also want to have a piece of wax paper. We'll get to that in a moment. And you want some type of craft glue. You can honestly use regular white glue that most of us have in our homes. If you mix white glue with a little bit of water, some people recommend a 50-50 split. I like more of a 60-40 split, mostly white glue with just a little bit of water. That makes a great glue for all kinds of things. For example, gluing a puzzle or a lot of craft projects, you can use just simple white glue. But most stores have what sometimes is called decoupage, or any kind of just craft glue. This brand happens to be Mod Podge, but there are other brands and there's other styles of glue that you can use. But we're going to be using some of this. And to start off with, I'm just going to demonstrate this real quick. Take your book, open to, and I'm going to change my camera view. So if you see this thing on your right to my left, this is just an arm that I use to mount another camera so that we get two views at once. But take your book, open it up, skip to the first few pages, find the page that you ultimately want the cutting to begin. So this book, there happens to be a cool illustration on this page. So I don't want to, maybe I want to keep that so that when I open up my keepsake box to put my keys in or coins or something, I still have this cool illustration, but my cutting actually begins on this page. So now that I know that, I want to skip that one. I'm going to come back later and cut this one page out individually because I want to take my time with it and I want to make it the most perfect cut that I can with this one page. Our tolerance level goes down as we cut deeper into the book, but I want this first one to be exact. So this is where I'm going to start my mask cutting. First, you're going to want to measure. At a minimum, measure at least 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the book in. But that doesn't give you a lot of room to work with. I like either 1/2 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch. It's kind of cool because in this case, the margins of the page are actually at 1/2 an inch. Yeah, they're right at 1/2 an inch. Let's see what they are on the right. A little bit more than 1/2 an inch, but it's close enough. The top, though, is going to be a little off. So right underneath this title right here at the top of the page, underneath that is the 1/2 an inch mark. So I'm just going to make a couple dots, measure myself, and I'm actually going to draw a line on this one. Normally I would draw lines on all four. You really don't have to because there you go, there's your line right there. Because this page will not be visible, it doesn't matter. See if you can see this. I drew, there we go. You can see my line marks right here. It doesn't matter that I made those. You're not going to be able to see that eventually. So make whatever lines you need so that you know where to cut. It's a little more difficult to measure from the center of the book out. So again, if there's a margin already there, an existing margin, go ahead and use that. Sometimes I like to have my margin on the left a little bit wider or longer than whatever my equal margins on the other 3 sides are. But that's a judgment call that you can make. So that's a 1/2 inch. So yeah, we'll just stick with that. Every book's a little bit different. The margins are a little bit different. So you're not always going to get this perfect 1/2 inch all the way around. But that's where we start. Here is where we start cutting. So I'm going to take my razor blade, again, safety first, cut out or make the blade visible, and very carefully, without cutting yourself, I'm just going to trace on these pencil marks that I just made. And I'll demonstrate this once. And then this is where it gets time consuming. I'm applying pressure, but I'm not putting too much pressure into it. Let the blade do the work. If you start putting excessive amounts of muscle, notice, keep your fingers away. Assume that the blade is going to slip and you're going to cut yourself. So always assume that you're at some point you're going to accidentally slip, and you don't ever want your thumb or another finger right there because bad things can happen. So hopefully the blade doesn't slip, but assume it's going to. So let the blade do the work. You have to apply a little bit of pressure, but not a lot. If you use a really sharp blade, you really don't need to. I'm going to adjust this just like this. I like to always cut away from me or away from me like that. Rarely do I like to cut in towards myself. I'm obviously not going to demonstrate cutting all the way through the book because it does take a while. But what you'll see after you make a few 4 cuts all the way around, some of the top pages easily come out. These pages easily come out. And by the way, these discarded pages make a great material for future crafts. If you do a lot of paper crafts, these make great things to set aside and keep. For example, in the fall, you can take these paper scraps, use a stencil and cut leaves out of them or any shape. Then you can make a really cool book wreath using those scraps. But we'll do that another DIY activity day. So you can see some of the pages have a nice clean cut all the way through, but eventually you start getting the pages that were mostly out, but sort of still stuck. And then as you get deeper, the page is mostly in with just a few cut lines. At your discretion, you can then switch to an X-Acto knife, and you can just gently release some of those pages that almost came out a moment ago. Take your time, figure out where it's sticking. And on this case, I'm not hardly applying any pressure. I know I eventually want to get deeper into the book, but now is not the time. So I just want to release some of those pages that were mostly out from before. Then as you get deeper into the book, you'll have pages that are mostly still attached to their page. You'll have a little bit of scoring where you can see the lines from the previous cut. But I don't have to do this every time, and especially with this book because my margins are so perfect right here. I like to remeasure the page, and I will redraw a 1/2 inch. I'll redraw my lines that I want to cut on. Being careful to make them straight. the purpose of that is it's just a lot easier for me to see a new line that I just drew. I can then trace my razor blade and basically start the process over again. If I'm just relying on these score marks that I can barely see, I can mostly follow the line, but it becomes really easy to sort of get off center and cut and make incorrect cuts. So every so often, I like to redraw the lines that I'm going to cut on. Again, measuring them out. And it's okay if you draw on the paper because this part of the paper you're not going to see. So I keep doing that all the way around, over and over and over again, taking my time until, let me get a book that's, I started earlier. Until you start getting some depth into it. You can kind of see that there's a good deal of depth. Make it as deep as you want. Right now it's about 1/2 inch. That might be fine for a lot of things, depending on what you're going to put in here, say your keys or something with more bulk in it. Maybe go 1 inch deep. In this case, the book itself, not counting the binding, I don't need an exact number, but it's a little under 1.5 inches. So if I go 1 inch deep, I'm going to have a fair amount of pages underneath that aren't going to be cut. That's what I want. You don't want to make this go all the way through. The idea is that it retains some of the qualities of itself as a book. So I've cut through over and over and over again, just like I mentioned. One technique is to leave your hole visible, and from the top you can take your pencil and trace out the square that the rectangle that you're cutting out. And so then when you open it up to that page, you have your lines. It's hard to see on this camera, but I can see those pencil lines I drew. The problem with doing it that way is your margins become less exact. So I recommend taking a ruler, measuring out the width. In this book, I wanted an inch margin. So it's almost where my line was, but it's a little off in some areas. So you'll be able to get a much straighter line. By remeasuring it. You don't do this every page, but every so often. So now you can kind of see that that's a much more visible line right there that I just drew. I would do that on at least the 3 sides. I can be a little more careless along this end just because it's harder to access. So, and this is one area where the binder clips come in, or a paper clip, or just a big rubber band to put it over and sort of hold all these together, because while you're cutting, you don't want all these pages falling down on you. It just becomes clunky. So I'm going to see if this is a binder clip will fit. It does. So gravity is going to try to make it fall down, but I can easily hold that up with one hand. Take my razor blade, making a cutting away motion. And I'm going to partially close the book on myself just a little bit so it's hard to see. I do that because if it's all the way open like this and I make my cut, these pages here, see if I can show you this. There we go. You'll see these pages, it's at an angle. So if I cut from the top down, I'm really not cutting straight down. I'm cutting at whatever this angle is. So that's a little tricky. So just to get away from that a little bit, try to close the book on itself. It's okay if it falls down a little bit. And so you're not going to be able to see this very well, but I'm going to make my cut, taking my time. Notice how slow I'm going. I'm not rushing it. Make a turn. And I'll demonstrate one more time. Again, be careful with your fingers before you start cutting. Kind of ask yourself where your fingers are. Make sure they're not in the way. So there's my next set of pages. Again, some of them pop out really easily. There's a little bit of stuck a little bit right there. That's why having the X-Acto knife is super helpful. There, they came right out. And I could just keep going. Now, get to the depth that you want, at least a ½ an inch, but you really don't need more than an inch deep. You'll notice now that there's a lot of loose little paper scraps that are sort of stuck on the pages. That's going to happen. To get rid of those, you can certainly use scissors, but if you just take your time and you can cut some of them out with your X-Acto knife and free them up as best you can. And that just happens because each page is not going to be exact. You're not individually cutting every page. You're measuring out every 7 to 10 pages and trying to cut through those to get through this as fast as reasonably possible. If you individually measured out every page one at a time and you cut one at a time, this would be a really clean looking, almost perfect interior box. It doesn't need to be that perfect. After you're done, it's optional, but you can take a piece of sandpaper, and if you squeeze these pages together, you can inside, so you can see, you can sand, oh, there we go, my camera froze. You can sand the inside along this edge, along this edge. I'm not really a big fan of sanding it. You don't need to, but you certainly can if you feel that that would improve your cuts or the smoothness of it. Once that's done, you're going to want to measure out that very first page, the one that, remember I said to set aside. You'll want to take your time, measure that out. So for example, on this other book that I started, I wanted to be able to see this illustration. I wanted this to be my first page. So this is where you will take a little bit more time measuring that out and making the most perfect cut that you can in the page. I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to try to do it real quick. And then we'll get to the glue. Because the pages underneath of it already have a hole, you're not putting hardly any pressure at all. And I'm even going to use the binder clip on this one. I'm going to even use the ruler as a guide. I want to measure that first. I think we said a ½ an inch. Oops. Grab my pencil. I like to make a few little dots and then I can line that up. And if I make my pencil mark really light, I can erase it. Go with the margin there. And so just really light. I'm not even pushing down on this at all. I'm just letting the weight of the blade do it. If you do it with an X-Acto knife, it's going to be too light. So you will have to apply a little bit of pressure. But these are so sharp, it'll cut right through the page. So you can kind of imagine how long this would take if you were this exact and perfect on every single page. It would just take forever. So that's why, oops. That's why when we get deeper, we're trying to cut 7 to 10 pages at a time just to get through it. So this is going to be my page that's visible when I open it. And that's going to be the top of my hole or my cavity in the book. So now I take my wax paper and I'm going to wrap that wax paper around this front of the book. I just don't want to get any glue on this interior part right here, and I don't want to accidentally glue the book cover to the book. So this is where a rubber band would work over top of it, or a clothespin, or a binder clip. I just want to hold that wax paper in place. So of course on this one I need to go deeper. So I'm going to go back to my pre-cut demonstration book. And you don't have to do this. If you're really careful, you don't. This is an optional step. I just think it helps. So then take your glue out. Again, a white glue mixed 50-50 mixture with water is almost always more than sufficient. And the same is true with gluing a puzzle. You don't need to buy fancy puzzle glue or fancy decoupage glue. You can just use white glue. But in this case, I do have some fancy craft glue that I'm going to use. A little bit goes a long way. So I'm just gluing the inside of these pages. I'm sort of painting it. I'm not applying a thick layer. I'm just kind of painting these edges. And this is where, if it's too rough, trimming it up a little bit with a sharp razor blade, or even sandpaper if you really want to get fickle, might be helpful, but you don't have to. You just need to paint the inside. And notice the page is moving around. It's okay, because right now we're just applying that wet glue. It doesn't dry instantly. So it gives us some time to work with. After you apply the glue on the inside of your hollowed out cavity, I'm going to remove this binder clip, but I'm going to keep the paper there, or keep the wax paper there. You can close it. Then you can actually glue the outer edge. So I'm not going to do it all the way because I want to do some more cutting a little later and make my cavity deeper. So I do that on around all four, not all four, the top, the bottom, and the side where the book opens. You don't need to do anything to the spine because it's already bound. This glue dries clear. And again, a little bit goes a long way, so there's no reason to make any glue globs or clumps or really heavy layers of glue. Just a nice thin layer works. And this is where I want to find a heavy weight, perhaps another book, because books can be heavy sometimes, and just lay that on top and let that sit for at least several hours. It wouldn't hurt it if it sat overnight. It doesn't need to sit that long. If you read the instructions on the glue, it says let dry 2 hours before continuing. So yeah, just let it set aside for a couple of hours. After your couple of hours are up, you can open it up, check it, and see if there's any weak spots that maybe need a teeny tiny bit more glue. Probably not though, it's probably gonna be fine. But once you have it glued, and the side is glue, and the side is glued, it's gonna hold its shape. So it's gonna be, instead of being a book with hundreds of pages, you sort of convert it into just a single unit with this hollowed out cavity. But then that's where you get to put your knickknacks, coins, awesome trinkets inside the book. And then once it's dry, of course, you can remove the wax paper. But then you can put your book on a bookshelf or have it anywhere in your home as just a decoration where you can keep these keepsakes. But that's our craft for the month. And let me show you a picture off the internet of what a completely finished one would look like. Oops. Just a second. Share my screen. So you can find a lot of websites that talk about how to do this. Oops. Push myself out of the way. So here's an image of one that's finished. The main thing is it's just time consuming to cut out these pages. You do not want to rush it because you don't want to risk cutting yourself. So just take your time, and yours in the end is going to look just as good as anything that you see online. And then you can put whatever you want in it. But this is just a really cool craft that you can do. It's a good way to repurpose a book that doesn't serve any more value because it's taking up space, but perhaps it's a book that has an attractive binding, and that you can repurpose it into a really cool keepsake box. So that's our craft for this month. Every month, we try to have a DIY activity using a variety of craft supplies and skill levels. So check back every month for our DIYs. They usually come out the third Friday of each month. And if you want to check out some of our past DIY activities, go to the Ruby Sisson website, which is pagosalibrary.org. Go there real quick. And I went there earlier to show you that picture of the book pumpkin. Go to our homepage, mouse over the adult tab, and then click on this adult DIY. I don't have all of them on here, but some of our previous DIY activities can be seen. So last month we did a mini Zen garden. We did paper plants before that. And then a while back, we did our DIY book pumpkins. So that's still there. Videos will be added and taken away over time. But check us out. Check out our print calendars at the library. See when we're doing these next. And let me know if you have any questions. My name is Brad, and you can contact us at the library by calling us at 970-264-2209 or send us an email to ruby@pagosalibrary.org. But thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.